Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Prior to the release of the recent smash hit Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, I stated that on this channel I was going to try to create deep dive retrospectives on every Turtles video game ever developed. This is turning out to be a far taller task than I ever imagined, as the amount of Turtles games out there is actually truly ridiculous. In fact, I am yet to even manage to round off the Konami era for the video game side of this franchise, and still have a couple of games left to talk about. In today's video, not only are we going to be covering one of these, but a title that holds the dubious accolade of often being considered the worst Turtles game that Konami ever produced. No Turtles video game released previously by the company would receive quite the bashing from gaming journalists that this one would get, which for me makes this title all the more intriguing to talk about today. So without further ado, this ladies and gentlemen is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Battle Nexus for PC and home consoles, Konami's worst Turtles game. Yeah. As covered on this channel before, the noughties would function as the second era in which the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles brand would flourish. Sure, it was not quite as popular as it was in its heyday in the late 80s and early 90s, but the heroes in house shells would make a respectable splash. As fans of the original animated series and movie trilogy grew up, the majority of the Turtles empire would be put on freeze after the failure of the god-awful live-action show known as The Next Mutation. If you want to learn more about this 1997 abomination, feel free to watch my previous upload on the 5th Ninja Turtle, but for now, let's position our focus towards the new millennium. 2003 would see the emergence of a new animated show, which took more influence from the original Eastman and Laird comic books than ever before, providing a darker aesthetic for new audiences and providing television programming that many debate was even better than the classic show. With this, of course, would see the return of video games, with over the course of just a few years, Japanese company Konami, who were behind the previous classic titles, would deliver to us another 6 of them, even though 3 of them share exactly the same names with the other 3. This would be because every game released on PC and home console formats would be accompanied by a completely different game sharing the same title that would see release on Nintendo handhelds, with the first 2 showing up on the GBA and the later one coming out for the Nintendo DS. These 6 games would see a mixed reaction from the general public and journalists alike, with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Battle Nexus for home formats receiving some of the harshest criticism. So let's look at this game in more detail. Released for the PlayStation 2, original Xbox, GameCube and Windows PCs in 2004, Battle Nexus would obviously function as the sequel to the Turtles game released for these formats that saw release the previous year, with both these Konami games functioning as cel-shaded third-person beat-em-ups, essentially looking to bring the gameplay of the classic era into the realm of 3D gaming. As much criticism as that these games received, one high quality aspect regarding these titles cannot be ignored, and that is the stylistic choice of opting for cel-shaded aesthetics. This in turn makes these games look a lot nicer to look at than the majority of games from the era, and certainly a lot more appealing to look at than GTA 3 for example. So that gets a thumbs up from me straight away. As for the first of these cel-shaded affairs, while it certainly did try and replicate the charm of the arcade classics, it still fell short in many areas, with many gamers being disappointed that the game only offered 2-player functionality rather than 4 like both Turtles Arcade and Turtles in Time. Battle Nexus would respond to this critical feedback and lust for a game more like Turtles Arcade by not only including a heavily requested 4-player mode, but the title would even include the 1989 arcade game as an unlockable, marking the first time in history that a good version of this game could be played in the homes. A pretty awesome extra in my opinion, and the sort of which greedy Japanese companies would never throw in for free with a new game today. Somewhat mirroring the previous game, Battle Nexus would follow the plot of the early 2000s animated series, with a story in this game closely following the events of the second season of the rebooted show. This means that throughout a playthrough, the action is laced together with cinematic cutscenes that have been adapted from various episodes from this time period. The time period in which the series featured a feudal Japan arc in which the origin of Uroku Saki was discovered. In this title that supports up to 4 players, rather than just players 1 fighter each in Battle Nexus's case, gamers instead select a team consisting of one of the 4 turtles and an unlockable further character who can be used to replace a turtle when they are hurt. So this probably has you wondering who the 4 further characters are, who you can play as in this game. Well, like the recently released Shredder's Revenge, fan favourite Splinter and Casey Jones are both playable. But in addition to these, you can play a Slasher and Ultron, who was attacked by Ultron's Shredder long ago, and even more interestingly, the enigmatic Karai. Each of these teams can utilise their own specific abilities that can be used to help players progress. For example, one team is capable of cutting through obstacles, another can lift heavy objects, one can reflect arrows with their guard, and another can utilise computer consoles. If less than 4 players are playing this game at once, one player can select more than one team and cycle through them to progress, resulting in a system that in some ways echoes back to Switch and the Turtles to utilise their individual abilities to progress in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 Radical Rescue for the Game Boy, or if we want to go really far back, strategically switching between Turtles in the first Turtles NES game. So once again, inspiration from past Turtles game design has been taken here. With regards to teaming up to achieve one unified goal for all, the game is communist in more ways than one, as in this entry in the series, players are forced to share just one life bar. This means that if one player takes a hit, the bar is lowered for all of them. Aside from the quirky ways of utilising different characters to overcome different kinds of obstacles, at its heart, Battle Nexus is a 3D beat 'em up where players must usually traverse from the beginning of a stage to get to a designated point, where along the way they must kill all the enemies, then a boss. Each playable character in the game can obviously be moved about using the joystick, with the D-pad being usable in order to position the camera around. Utilising the various buttons, they are mapped to a weak attack, strong attack, a jump, a block and a dash. There are also buttons mapped so that players can throw shurikens, lift objects and switch between characters, so nothing too fancy or complicated. As players fight against opponents, by combining button inputs, further moves can be executed, such as charge attacks, jumping shurikens, and a variety of combos that can vary in function to stunning enemies to being able to take out mid-air opposition. As for the charge attacks, they are unique for each character, meaning you have a cool variety of moves to experiment with between different characters. When fighting through these beat 'em up stages, players also have the opportunity to collect artifacts that are often hidden or located in more difficult to reach places. Not only does collecting these give players a reason to spend extra time on stages, but by collecting crystal pieces for example, they can be used to increase players' attack, defense and more. Outside of the playable lineup of fighters, other memorable characters from the show also show up. These include April O'Neil, who runs a store in the game, Fugitoid, a human from the show trapped inside a robot's body, Leatherhead the mutant crocodile, and of course the dastardly Shredder himself. Further from the main game and story, there is also what is known as Tournament Mode, which functions as open brawls where you often have to take out a large number of enemies. So overall the game is essentially a 3D beat 'em up that is faithful to the source material, and throwing in the original arcade game for extra measure is a lovely touch, when we bear in mind that conceptually at least, this is a good game. So let's discuss why this one ended up the most critically panned Turtles game out of all of the Turtles video games from Konami. Some of the harshest criticism for the game would come from GameSpy, who would only score the game 1.5 out of 5 stars. Amusingly, they would praise the killer conversion of Turtles Arcade that can be unlocked by those who have played Battle Nexus. They would state though that the only problem is they have to suffer through a thankless chore of a modern day pseudo sequel before this extra, the only item of value on the disc, is unlocked. Very harsh remarks indeed. They would also comment that the fast, furious combat that can be found in the arcade games is lacking in both this game and the previous iteration of this generation of Turtles games from 2003. Regarding the action, they would write, "The control scheme feels clunky, and unresponsive, making battle a pain in the posterior. Worse, armed assaults never adequately convey the feeling that you're truly kicking the crap out of the assaulted Mouser robots and Foot Clan henchmen which pass for opponents. Enemy artificial intelligence is less than impressive as well. None too bright, you'll be shocked when foes even bother with taking the time to turn around and confront you. They're just that apathetic. GameSpy would also harshly criticise the game's presentation, an area of the game that personally I thought was pretty good. They, on the other hand, would describe it as a jumbled looking mess that offered up fairly run-of-the-mill presentation. They would also knock the multiplayer aspect of the game, stating that the easygoing AI and unfulfilling fight mechanics won't entice any of your friends to stick around, unless that is they want to take a crack at an aging arcade classic which far outshines its misbegotten spawn of a big budget successor. Alas, you have to play through the majority of the new game to unlock the old one. It's hard to justify. They concluded that it's a real shame we had high hopes when Battle Nexus was announced earlier this year, especially when the inclusion of the quintessential Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles title was revealed. Sadly, not nearly enough effort was placed into the game to make it stand proudly alongside its elder brother. Avoid it like the plague and hope that if we're all in for a trilogy, the next episode sees the heroes in a half shell pursuing an adventure that's not nearly as half-baked. While IGN would in no way shower this game with praise, they didn't bury it to the same degree as GameSpy, instead awarding the game a slightly less embarrassing 6 out of 10. Then again, if you know anything about the way big sites like IGN review games, they never want to piss off game publishers too much, so games are rarely scored much lower than this anyway. So let's dig into some of their cold takes. The IGN review would in part reflect back on the game's prequel, highlighting issues with that title that they were hoping to see ironed out with this one. These issues would include what they deemed as poor enemy AI and a lack of variety in gameplay. They would comment that Battle Nexus did manage to improve on some elements somewhat, but it still suffers from dumb enemies, bland gameplay, and shoddy control. They would also bring up something I have yet to mention in this video so far, the inclusion of racing sequences. They would state that these can be mildly entertaining when played with friends. Too bad though that the racing sequences control as badly as the rest of the game. After you've fallen into a pit or missed a jump the 10th time due to unresponsive controls, there's a good chance your friend will abandon you, leaving you to weep all by yourself, controller in hand. Speaking of the controls, this would be IGN and many others' biggest issue with this game. They would write, one of the biggest concerns in the first Turtles game was control. It hasn't been improved in Battle Nexus. A slight pause still precedes every jump, forcing you to miss critical jumps during platform puzzles. You also can't block fast enough to avoid damage in some situations, especially after performing a combo. The double jump also feels a little wonky, forcing you to fall into bottomless pits quite often when jumping from platform to platform. In terms of positives regarding the game and why it appears that they scored it so much higher than that of GameSpy, it sounds like the inclusion of Turtles Arcade had a lot to do with their grade, which is illustrated with their final verdict, whereby they would write, in the end, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Battle Nexus improves on its predecessor by including a list of groovy extras and providing each turtle with unique abilities. Battle Nexus also lets you play 4-player co-op. Sadly, the shoddy controls and subpar enemy AI keep Battle Nexus from succeeding. Poor control spoils the fun. Overall, this game is an improvement, but nowhere near the addictiveness of earlier NES and arcade games based on the Turtles license. Looking back at how this game was perceived, I can really see why so many people were not a fan of this game. For starters, during the 80s and 90s, Konami Turtles games were some of the greatest video games around. Hence why people are so hyped to see many of them re-released as part of a collection next month. Battle Nexus on the PS2 on the other hand was a letdown, as these 3D beat-em-ups fail to include the elements that make beat-em-ups so fun in the first place. tight responsive controls that make defeating opponents in that kind of game satisfying in the first place. Pair this with bad AI, what is even the point of a brawler where none of the aspects that make a great brawler are present? It's no surprise that the reception to this game was so bad, despite in my opinion having pretty good looking graphics that hold up well to this day. Personally, I feel that if you want to experience this era of Turtles at its best in video game form, then you are best off sticking with the handheld entries. They are much more fun, and the 2D 16-bit style graphics are a cool throwback to the franchise's heyday. Still, if people are entertained by this one, I hope you tune in to my next Turtles episode, as I only have one more Konami era Turtles video game left to cover. Then I would have finally covered everything that could feature within a second Konami Cowabunga collection. So make sure you subscribe and tune in for that one. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, that was the story of the worst Konami's Turtles game, so be sure to let me know down in the comment section below what you thought of this video and whether or not you agree with the general consensus surrounding this game. I would love to hear your thoughts. Videos like this are in part made possible due to the thoughtful people who back my work over on Patreon, who, with your aid, hopefully I will be able to power through and make videos on every Turtles game ever for you. Speaking of my awesome backers, special thank yous go out to A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Sebastian Velez, Heyo, Paulo Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Coriomar Sr., Ron Dinch, Evan Border, Philip Manth, Azur Arkai, Joaquin Varela, Michael Calix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of Attack, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Johnny Holly, August Piazza, Justin Wang, Capcom vs SNK, Hermes Gonzalez, Man Shovel, Michael Hall, Sang Hee, Norma Stitz, Langston Miller, Noob, Sarah Powell, Flaming Renee, Marvin Araliga, TOG Driver, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Bale, Chris Fisk, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Synth Spaces, Punk Toast, Steve, Awesome Jacket Dude, and everybody else who backs my work over on the Patreon platform. Thank you for being a part of the most exclusive club on all of YouTube. But anyone can join, so is it exclusive really? So just shut the hell up and become one of my Patreon backers. That'd be much appreciated. Thank you. Bye.